Hello, it is my special joy and privilege to be part of the inaugural activities of establishing the Congress of the Romanian Society of Lifestyle Medicine. I'm Dr. Hans Diehl, and I'm looking forward to spending some time with you in that your chair lady, that is Dr. Mercoure Hutanu, invited me to perhaps discuss the role of diet in the area of our common chronic diseases. It has been a wonderful experience in working with Dr. Emanuela Mercoure Hutanu to begin to prepare for this very inaugural event. She assigned me to discuss the complicity of diet in the cause and cure of chronic diseases. I mean, is there really a relationship between diet and disease? And so I want to cover this in my first lecture. I want to talk about the role of diet in the etiology of circulation-related chronic diseases. And what is very, very amazing to me is that I need to give this presentation through the lens of the American statistics, because I really don't know the Romanian statistics, but how I know that the American culture, particularly the dietary culture, is spreading very rapidly and is becoming a global force. And so what you're going to be hearing from me through the American lens is probably something that will ultimately become stronger and stronger, also part of your culture in Romania. In America, we have 30% of all the deaths are due to cardiovascular disease. That's heart disease and strokes, 30%. And then you have 21% for cancer, and 11% of all of our deaths are due to prescription drugs. Now, interestingly enough, the Romanian statistics are such that in Romania, you have 60% of all of your deaths are due to cardiovascular disease. So you have a big job before you, and perhaps dietary changes and lifestyle changes, intelligently done, can do something to throttle the expansion and the presence of these chronic diseases. What many people may not realize is that heart disease has not always been with us to the extent that we have it today. Here you have a medical textbook, 1920, by Sir William Osler. He wrote, you can expect one heart attack a year in an average hospital in an average sized town. That's how it was then. One heart attack a year in an average sized town. Today in America, we have 3,000 heart attacks every day, with cardiovascular disease being responsible for every third death. That is the 30%. But in Romania, it is 3 out of 5 deaths are due to cardiovascular disease, heart disease, and strokes, which is 60%. Breast cancer issues. Again, in 1960, in a lifetime, 1 in 20 women could expect in America to become a victim of breast cancer. Today, it's 1 in 7. The incidence rates have gone up significantly in America for cancer, not only breast cancer, but other cancers as well, such as colon cancer and prostate cancer. Then you have an increase in diabetes. An enormous change has taken place there. The number of diabetics doubles every 10 years in our society. And look what happened to the chairs. Take a look. 1900 to 1970, the size of the chair didn't really change all that much. It went from 43 centimeters to 45 centimeters. Basically, it didn't change at all. But then look what happened. Today, the average size in America is no longer 45 centimeters, but it's 61 centimeters. What happened? And of course, it's not only diabetes that is increasing with obesity, but also high blood pressure, heart disease, arthritis, asthma, sleep apnea, and many of the cancers are all related to a society where obesity reigns. And in our society, 74% of American adults are either overweight or obese. Now, Romania does a much better job there because you have not yet gotten into that obesity situation as far, but be careful, because as you are seeing the encroachment of the American dietary habits and products, it is going to be easy to gain weight without even realizing it. Well, there was a time when people came to me and they said, well, the only reason why we have so much chronic disease today in comparison to 100 years ago or 50 years ago is because people live so much longer today. So they have to die of something. Well, not quite. Here you see data comparing 1996 versus 2012. And you notice, regardless of the age, whether it's 45 to 64 or 61 to 79, or the age bracket over 80 years of age, in every case, the chronic disease rates have increased by 50% over the last 16 years. So there's a real increase in chronic disease. And the question is why? We have more medications, we have more medical care, we have more budgets for medical interventions, and yet the diseases, chronic diseases, are on the run. Could it be the diet? Well, let me show you what happened in 1972. 1972, that was really the onset, the beginning of the fast food industry. The numbers were very small then, but look what happened over the next 30, 40, 50 years. Huge changes. Everything has changed. 48% of the food today is taken out. We no longer eat at home, we're eating out. And even in Romania, I noticed that there are probably 39 McDonald's. You have tacos, you have KFC, you have Burger Kings. You're becoming another cultural oasis of American fast foods. And that is probably not to your advantage. We have learned much from epidemiological studies looking at different populations. For instance, when the Western culture, the dietary Western lifestyle invaded Japan and China, circulatory diseases were very, very rare in these countries because these people lived on a very starch-based traditional diet, very simple foods. But these diseases, like heart disease and strokes and hearing loss and impotence, these are all circulation-related diseases. These diseases became very, very common as the diets became westernized. Here you see some of the examples: in 1952, Japan, 1978, China. And then you had, in 1991, Lithuania. The Soviet Union collapsed in 1989, and Lithuania now brought in the Western culture, the Western diet, and everything began to change. Saudi Arabia, same thing. The incidence rates of chronic disease increased dramatically. And here's then what you see is the major dietary shift that began in the 1970s in particular. This was a time when we shifted from whole foods to fractioned foods. We shifted from slow foods to fast foods. We shifted from eating at home, cooking our own meals, to eating out. And we no longer ate potatoes. We began to eat potato chips. And we ate no longer corn, but corn chips. And instead of eating oats, we began to eat Oreos. And instead of eating beans, we began to eat burgers. And instead of drinking water, we began to consume soft drinks. And with that, you see a dramatic shift. The green bars become less and less and less. This represents the starchy energy content in the national diet. At the same time, you see the blue color, the representing protein, also increases very significantly, particularly because of the enrichment of animal protein. And then also take a look at the yellow colors. Sugars became more and more prominent, and animal fats and vegetable fats became also very, very part of our diet. And so you can see that the sugar and fat became the major portion of our national diet. This major dietary shift over time in the American culture can be broken down into two major dietary shifts. The first shift was from foods to products. We no longer eat foods, we eat industrialized products. We eat refined products more and more and more. And this, of course, has really increased the consumption of sugar. Today, we're no longer eating 2 teaspoons per person per day. Today, we're consuming 30 teaspoons of sugar per person per day. And of course, most of it comes from these refined soft drinks, from products like you see here, the banana split, or we also have now considerably more refined calories coming from refined oils, fats. Did you know that it takes 14 ears of corn to produce 1 tablespoon of corn oil? Now, 1 tablespoon of corn oil, that's 200 calories. You can eat this very, very easily. You put it into your potato salad, and before you know it, you have lots and lots of calories coming in. You could have never had these calories coming in if you would have to eat the corn oil in the form that it came in, namely in the form of ears of corn. Of course, you see here when you have corn oil now, you can make corn chips. And you take 1 small portion of corn chips, 1 bag of 9 ounces or 250 grams, and you see the calories, 1,440 calories. That's almost as many calories as a woman probably should have for the whole day. This is just 1 small package of corn chips, and then you have a lot of salt with that, and look at the amount of fat. Most researchers today probably recommend a fat consumption level of less than 35 or 40 grams. This just little bag of corn chips already has 90 grams of fat. And of course, these products I thought were just found in American stores. We couldn't find them in Romania, I thought. I was wrong. I saw them advertised in Romanian supermarkets at Lidl's and Kaufland and Carrefour's. They're everywhere now in Romania too. Okay, let's take a closer look at potatoes. Let's take 200 grams of potatoes, 200 grams of potatoes and 200 grams of potato chips. Please take a look. When you take 200 grams of potatoes, you just have 105 calories because there's very little fat in potatoes as they come in nature. But then on the left-hand side, you see potato chips. Now you have in 200 grams of potato chips, you have 1,050 calories, which means you have 10 times as many calories for the same amount of weight. This is what we mean by the change in the caloric density. Refined foods are usually concentrating the calories because you have removed the fiber. And of course, industrial producers know this. They know that we love the sweetness of sugar. They know we love the taste of salt. They know what turns us on. They know how to capture and hijack our pleasure centers in the brain. And so that's why people today talk about sugar and salt as being substances that are hooking us. And take a look of how sugar and fat cause a concentration of calories in the form of this milkshake here. This is the large milkshake. This is 2,000 calories, and we consume this and seemingly oftentimes no idea of all the calories that we have just taken in. And so it really shouldn't really surprise us when we see that probably 44% of our calories consumed in America have very little nutritional value. They're devoid of nutritional contributions that we need to have. We call them empty calories. So it is amazing, isn't it? In a country of abundance of calories, where we are overfed, at the same time, we're undernourished. And here's Dr. Walter Willett from Harvard University. He said, the transition from food to becoming an industrialized product has become a foundational problem, especially in the area of circulation-related diseases, because the actual processing of food has stripped the food of its nutrition and concentrated its calories with adverse health effects. So this is the first shift in our diet, moving more and more towards refined processed food. But there's a second shift, and that is to increasing the consumption of animal products. Here you see we used to be at 56 kilos per person a year. Today it's more like close to 100 kilos. We've almost doubled the amount of animal products over the last 100 years. Would you have imagined that in America we consume in a lifetime 12 cows, 25 hogs, and 2,400 chickens? And yet people often come to me and they say, but sir, we need to have some protein. Yeah, right. Take a look at sirloin steak there in the middle of the chart. When you look at the calories coming from protein, that's about 25% of the sirloin steak is protein and 75% is fat. When you look at spare ribs, it's even worse. 20% comes from protein, 80% comes from fat. And so we have to recognize that probably 75% of the fat that we eat is very well hidden. So it's very easy to take in too much fat and too many calories. Where do these fat calories come from? The number one carrier of fat in the American diet is meat, poultry, fish, and dairy. That represents 50% of all the fat that we eat comes from the animal categories. Then you have salad oils and shortenings. That's another 31%. So this is where most of our fat calories come from: animal products, and then salad oils and shortening. And here you see it again. Processed meats. You have on the bottom there, sort of an American hot dog. Well, that's 15% protein and 85% fat. You're looking at some of the salami, that's 70% protein and 73% fat. It's not just the calories, but also the World Health Organization declared, after much research, that these processed foods were actually carcinogens, just like tobacco, asbestos, and diesel fuel, contributing to cancer. Folks, we have not really fully understood the results of moving into a Western kind of a diet, whether it's the empty calories, which are nutritionally deficient, or whether it's the animal products, which are to a large extent carcinogenic, contributing to cancer. And then you look at dairy foods. Did you know that when it comes to cheese, as you see here, 71% of the cheese is fat, and most of it is saturated fat? Or when you look at Philadelphia cheese, this is a cream cheese that's 90% fat. Look at the increase in the last, 100 years. We've gone from 1.7 kilograms to now 16 kilograms per person per year. And with that, cheese has become the number one source of saturated fats. These are fats that are directly contributing to the development of cholesterol by the liver. Where do you find most of the saturated fats? Take a look here. When you look at cheese or butter, butter is 63 saturated fat. Of all the calories, 63% is saturated fat. When it comes to beef fat, 50% is saturated fat. Olive oil is 15% saturated fat. But then you look at palm oil. Palm oil is 78% saturated fat. And then look at coconut oil. Coconut oil is the most saturated fat. It drives the production of cholesterol by the liver more than any other fat, any other oil. And please note, it doesn't matter whether it's an olive oil or whether it's a coconut oil or whether it's a beef fat. Every gram of these fats is 9 calories. So people come to me and they say, well, but olive oil is all right, isn't it? That's a healthy oil. Well, if you're trying to lose weight, it doesn't make any difference, because there is no good fat for you. There's no good oil, because every gram of any kind of fat is 9 calories. It's a very calorie-rich concentration. And what concerns us, that the number one driver of cholesterol that ends up in the bloodstream comes from the liver. It's produced there in response to the amount of saturated fat in the diet. Let me give some ideas. Most of the saturated fat actually comes from animal products, such as cheese, butter, beef fats, chicken. All these animal products have significant amount of saturated fat. But you also have to think about the products that are coming from the plant kingdom. Olive oil is fairly low, 15% there is saturated fat. Palm oil is 78% saturation, and olive oil, 92% of the fat is saturated fat. I mean, that's why a recent medical committee published findings, and they said, we recommend coconut oil. Put it on your skin, but don't ever put it in your mouth because it drives the cholesterol production in the body. And so this now gives us the typical American diet, where 55% of the calories comes from refined and processed foods, 31% of all the calories that we eat come from dairy and animal foods, and only 14% comes from fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, these are the beans, and some nuts that we should eat. And most nutritional scientists would recommend that we should really increase these kind of foods as they come in nature. But industrialized processed foods have taken over, animal products have taken over. And here's Dr. Willett again from Harvard. He said, epidemiologists, people that study the epidemics of these chronic diseases, have long known that the major determinants of our killer diseases are dietary and lifestyle factors. Let's take a look at heart disease now. Here you see the coronary artery sitting on top of the heart. This is the cross-section of a coronary artery. You see the outside ring. This is the actual vessel wall, the arterial wall. But all the stuff inside that you see there, this is cholesterol, these are fats, these are dead cells, this is calcium. This is then narrowing the opening of the coronary artery.
Heart attacks, certain cancers, osteoporosis, diabetes. The major diseases of our society may be caused in part by what we eat.
I first woke up, so to speak, when I was working on the anesthesia service, learning how to put people to sleep. And I was seeing my patients for the next day's surgery for coronary artery bypass surgery in order to bypass clogged arteries in their heart. Because it was late at night, I drew the man's blood test, and when I took the blood to the laboratory and had it processed, I couldn't believe my eyes. Now, normally, this liquid layer floating on top of the blood clot is quite transparent. It's a yellow, but quite clear. You can see right through it. The blood in this patient's tube, however, was anything but clear. The serum floating on his clot was thick and greasy white. It looked like glue. In fact, it stuck to the sides of the blood tube when I shook the tube. I went back to the patient. I said, Mr. Phillips, did you eat before you came to the hospital tonight? He said, yes. I said, what did you have? He said, I had a cheeseburger and a milkshake. And when he said that, I realized that what I was looking at in his tube was all the fat in the beef burger, all the butter fat in the cheese, and the butter fat in the ice cream and in the milkshake. And all this fat had oozed out into his blood and actually turned his blood fatty. Well, 30, 40, 50 years of keeping your blood very fatty creates changes in the blood vessels that are very dangerous.
Over the years, arteries can become clogged with fatty material. Then a blood clot can form, blocking the blood flow completely. If the artery leads to the heart, the lack of oxygen can cause heart muscle to die. That's a heart attack. If the clogged artery leads to the brain, the patient has a stroke.
The next morning, we took Mr. Phillips to the operating room, and I put him to sleep, and the surgeon opened up his chest. And from these arteries, he began pulling out yellow, greasy deposits of fatty material called atherosclerosis.
Did you see that? You just saw the underlying disease process for all circulatory diseases, atherosclerosis, inflammatory processes that cause the arteries to become narrowed down progressively. Here you see what happens from birth to 70 years of age. You have a gradual narrowing of the arteries, and yet you have oftentimes absolutely no symptom that this is happening. For 40% of the people, the first symptom of this narrowing process is sudden death. That usually happens when you have 70, 80, 90% narrowing. You are in great danger that this small opening could be blocked off and cutting the blood supply to the heart muscle. And the heart muscle then goes into an infarction, dies. This is not a natural process of aging. This has to do with our lifestyle. Here you see from the top to the bottom the different clinical entities that begin to emerge in due time. And here you see the clinical expression of this underlying narrowing process, atherosclerosis. If it's the heart, it's a myocardial infarction or angina pectoris. If it's the brain, it can be a cerebral infarction, a stroke, senility, memory loss, hearing loss, visual loss. Then it can also affect your kidney vessels, and then you have to be concerned about hypertension. And later on, you have to worry about gangrene affecting your feet, such as in diabetes and impotence. Here you have the penile arteries becoming narrowed down to the extent that blood can no longer flow and blood flow can no longer be sustained, and you know what happens. And then you have claudication and degenerative disc disease as well. These are all related to atherosclerotic processes that narrow the arteries so that optimal blood flow can no longer take place. And the question is, what are the underlying risk factors for this narrowing process? Well, this comes from the framing, this comes from these factors here in this arch come out of the famous Framingham study. They began to identify that the closer these factors are to the arch, the more powerful they are in driving this disease entity, atherosclerosis. So the number one factor, LDL cholesterol. Number two, smoking and high blood pressure. These are the classical risk factors that drive atherosclerosis and circulatory diseases. But then you also have to be concerned about diabetes, obesity, triglycerides. And on the right-hand side, you have inactivity, stress, and genetics. And of course, at the bottom, you have age and gender. There's not much you can do about those kind of factors, but all the others you can change. You can do something about these factors. These are lifestyle-related factors. Just to give you some idea, if you have a very high cholesterol and you have a high blood pressure, you're a smoker, you have diabetes, and you have a positive EKG, you know, the chances of a 35-year-old man to have a heart attack in 6 years is 140 times more frequently taking place than if you had ideal cholesterol like 150. You had ideal blood pressure like 120, no smoking, no diabetes, and your treadmill test was fine. Just think, these are factors that we have control over. These are then diseases of lifestyle. And please note, most of these risk factors are under the control of our lips. Take a look at the yellow stars: cholesterol, lips, food; high blood pressure, food, especially salt intake; diabetes, obesity, triglycerides. We can make changes, and diabetes can be modified within 3 to 4 weeks. Triglycerides will come down in 3 to 4 weeks. Blood pressures come down, cholesterol comes down. You see, these risk factors are under the control of our forks, our fingers, the smoking, and our feet, inactive lifestyle. And let me focus on cholesterol. Here's the very famous Mr. Fit study, the multiple risk factor intervention trial. This is a primary prevention trial for heart disease. 356,000 people were screened, 12,800 were enrolled in the study, and they followed these people for 16 years. And what they found was very, very astonishing. They found that those people who had the lowest cholesterol had also the very lowest death rate from heart disease. Please take a look when you compare the lowest cholesterol there at about 150, and you compare it now with the highest cholesterol, which is more in the neighborhood of 300. On the left-hand side, you see the coronary death rates. And you see, you go from 4 deaths per 1,000 all the way up to 18 deaths per 1,000 people, which means the cholesterol by itself will predict a 4.5 time differential for coronary death. Nothing is more important when it comes to avoiding and reversing atherosclerosis, but to get the cholesterol numbers down to the level of 150, 160, 140. These are what we sometimes call normal cholesterol levels of 200. They're only normal for people that normally die from heart disease. You don't want to be normal. You want to be ideal. And an ideal cholesterol level should be about 150 or less. Here is Dr. Jeremiah Stamler, the mastermind of the Mr. Fit study. He said 87% of all major coronary events before age 65 could be prevented if Americans would get their cholesterol down to 180 or less, get their blood pressure down, the systolic one, to below 125. We could avoid 87% of these coronary events if we got the cholesterol levels down and also the blood pressure levels. And this is directly related. And he said, it is further reasonable and sound. He said in 1978 in a very famous lecture, he said it's further reasonable and sound to designate rich diet as the primary, the essential and necessary cause of the current epidemic of premature atherosclerotic disease raging in Western industrialized countries. Cigarette smoking, yeah. And hypertension, yeah. They're important secondary and complementary causes. Primary cause, essential cause, necessary cause, rich diet. And then here you have Dr. Antonio Gatto, then the president of the American Heart Association. Dr. Gatto spoke before the Senate in 1977, and he said, in societies with blood cholesterol levels below 160, it's virtually impossible of finding heart disease or atherosclerosis. And so the question then is, what drives these cholesterol levels? What are the determinants? Well, we have to think about cholesterol itself, the dietary cholesterol, which is only found in animal products. So cholesterol is only found in animal products. Number two, you have to also think in terms of saturated fat. Saturated fat is the driver of the cholesterol that comes from the liver. So liver produces cholesterol and adds significantly to the cholesterol that we eat coming from animal products. And then of course, if you have a diet that is fairly high in natural soluble fiber, it helps to take the cholesterol down. So the 3 factors that drive the cholesterol in our bloodstream are the dietary cholesterol, the diasaturated fat, and the soluble fiber. Now, just to make it more meaningful to you, let me mention to you what they found. They found that for every % increase, for every 1% increase in blood cholesterol, you increase the coronary risk by 2.5 times. So what does that mean? 1% increase in blood cholesterol translates into 2.5 times more likelihood of developing a heart attack. Let me give an example. If you dropped your cholesterol from 250 down to 200, which you can do in 30 days, really, by making dietary changes. If you would drop your cholesterol down from 250 to 200 points, that means that's 50 points over 250. That's a 20% drop. So 20% drop in cholesterol would reduce your heart attack risk by times 2.5 times 20, that would be 50%. You could reduce your coronary risk by 50% within 30 days, in most cases, by making some simple dietary changes. I mean, this is powerful. Of course, this is a very powerful association between the cholesterol in our bloodstream and the coronary risk. And I mentioned to you that we can do this in 30 days. This is our CHIP program that I developed some years ago. This is a 30-hour education program to help people make lifestyle changes and moving towards a diet that is very, very low in fat and very, very low in animal products, and basically is moving towards a whole food dietary program, native foods, food as they come in nature, fruits and vegetables and whole grains and lots of beans and some nuts. Here you see people in our program. We had 126 people that had cholesterol levels above 280. The drop was 20% in less than 30 days. Diet is very, very powerful in determining, and yes, diet is very, very powerful in driving the levels of cholesterol. Here you have Dr. William Connor, a professor of medicine, who, as a researcher, said, if you want to really create heart disease in animals, that's very, very easy to do. All you have to do is give these animals a diet with lots of saturated fat and cholesterol, which you find in animal products and, of course, in coconut oil. And number two, give them trans fats that are commonly found in processed foods. So if you want to create a heart attack in monkeys, here's what Dr. William Castelli, the former director of the Framingham study, said. If you want to create coronary artery disease in monkeys, all you have to do is feed them a typical American hospital diet. Something to think about, isn't it? Huge studies at Harvard University documented that you can prevent 70% of stroke, 71% of cancers, 82% of heart disease, 91% of diabetes if you make some dietary changes. Here's Tommy Thompson, the secretary of the American Health and Human Services Department. He said, our nation's largest killer diseases are largely lifestyle related, and they can therefore be prevented or delayed. They're not prevented by vaccines. They're not cured by pills and procedures. No. They are largely an extension of our health damaging behaviors, our use of tobacco, lack of exercise, and our rich diet. And here's the former Surgeon General, Dr. C. Everett Koop. He said, there is nothing that influences long-term health prospects more than what we eat. Well, let me take you to Loma Linda in California, where I live. As a matter of fact, as I'm looking outside my window, I can see the medical complex, the university, which is also oftentimes cited as the center of the Adventist health studies, which then gave rise to the understanding that Adventists are some of the longest living people in the world. Let me give you some examples. Here's my neighbor, Dr. Ellsworth Wareham, when he was 104 years of age, and Marge Jetton when she was 106 years of age. These are North America's longevity stars. Dr. Wareham was still doing surgery when he was 95. And he said, hey, Hans, it's a cinch. I've done it for so many years. It's easy. And what are the characteristics of the blue zones in general? I've picked three for you: Loma Linda, Sardinia, and Okinawa in Japan. And what they have in common is, as you see on the center, a supportive family, no smoking, plant-based diets. Lots of beans are being consumed in societies, moderate activity, and social engagement. These are some of the things that they have in common. Healthy social circle. The Adventists are known for eating some nuts every day. The people in Sardinia are known for having a lot of flavor beans, and they also enjoy some wine from time to time. And then you have the people in Okinawa that are known for, they have no time urgency. They have empowered women. They enjoy gardening and sunshine. But what else is there in the Adventist group that makes them so unique? What are some of the lifestyle factors that enable Adventists to live longer than anybody else in North America? No smoking, no alcohol, weekly rest day. They're pretty religious people. They don't miss too many worship services on their weekends. They have spiritual resources and a good social support structure. But among themselves, and there are about 20 million Adventists around the world, and that dietary diversity makes the Adventists an ideal group to study because their lifestyle is very homogeneous. They live a very similar lifestyle around the world, and yet they're different in their diet. There are Adventists that are meat-eating Adventists. There are Adventists that are lacto-vegetarians, and there are Adventists that are pure vegetarians. And in the early studies in the 1980s, when they looked at 25,000 Adventists here in California, and they compared them with the general Californian population, age matched, income matched, and so on, they found that Adventists that are meat eaters only have 64% of the expected fatal heart disease rate compared to the Californian cohort. Why do Adventists have less fatal heart disease than the average Californians? Because they're all meat eaters by and large, right? Because Adventists don't smoke. And Adventists may also have a stronger social support network. But then look at what happens when you compare meat-eating Adventists with lacto-ovo-vegetarian Adventists and with pure vegetarian Adventists. The more you move towards a vegetarian diet, the lower the rate of fatal heart disease. In addition, they found in this study that Adventist lacto-ovo-vegetarians, when compared to Adventists that are meat eaters, that the SDALO-LOVE, that stands for Seventh-day Adventist lacto-ovo-vegetarians. These are vegetarians that eat lacto, milk products, and ovo, egg products. So when you compare Adventists that are lacto-vegetarians with Adventists that are meat-eating Adventists, you find that the vegetarians have only half the amount of high blood pressure. You find that they only have 2/3 the amount of arthritis. You find that they only have 2/3 the amount of prostate cancer. And you find that lacto-vegetarians, when compared to meat-eating Adventists, have only half the amount of colon cancer. So there's some real benefits here. And this then, of course, contributes to the longer life expectancy. These findings were rather earth-shaking at the time, and they caused the National Institutes of Health and other agencies in the government to come to Lomond and say, can you do a larger study? And so at that time, some years later, they enrolled 96,500 Adventists in North America, and they categorized them very carefully according to their dietary habits. About 9% of these people were pure vegetarians. 31 of these Adventists were lacto-ovo-vegetarians. 10% were fish-eating vegetarians, and about 50%, when you combine 6 and 44, 50% of these Adventists were actually meat-consuming people. And so the question was, if we follow them for 5-10 years, can we identify what diseases will emerge in these different dietary groupings? Does diet make a difference? And here are the clinical outcomes. If you wanted to lose weight, if you wanted to have ideal weight, what category, what dietary group would you choose to help you to accomplish that goal? If you are meat-eating Adventist, like these are Adventist women in North America, if you are a meat-eating Adventist woman, you weigh on the average 82 kilograms. If you are an Adventist woman in North America who follows a very vegetarian, pure vegetarian diet, then you would only weigh 64 kilograms, a difference of 18 kilograms. And then you can look at the other categories and you can choose which weight do you want. Just choose the diet and it will give you a pretty good idea of how you can accomplish your goal. This for women. And if you want to take a look at Adventist men, here you see the red bar. These are Adventist men that are meat consumers. The average weight there is 88 kilograms. On the other end, you have Adventist pure vegetarians. They only weigh 73 kilograms, a difference of 15 kilograms. Again, if you wanted to be successful in keeping your weight down or losing weight, you know what color to choose, don't you? Red would not be the color, would it? But maybe you ought to move towards lilac or yellow, or maybe even green. On the other hand, if you are a carnivorous Adventist, the likelihood of developing diabetes that needed to be treated is 6.3%. On the other hand, if you are a plant-based dieter, if you're eating, following a pure vegetarian diet, then the likelihood of developing diabetes and needing medication for it in 7 years is only 1.6%, which is a four-fold differential. And the same thing is true for hypertension, four-fold difference. And the same thing is true for cholesterol, five-fold difference. If you are following a carnivorous diet, if you are among the meat-eating Adventists, you have 5 times more likelihood that you will have to be on medication to be treated for high cholesterol in comparison to those that are following a plant-based pure vegetarian diet. So there's a big relationship, an association, maybe even a causality between diet and chronic disease. Now, let me take you to one of the largest studies done, published in the Journal of the American Medical Association in 2017, major study, a monumental study entitled Dietary Factors and Mortality from Cardiometabolic Diseases. These are circulation-related diseases, as well as diseases like diabetes. And they found that the cardiometabolic mortality rates could be cut in half if people did the following. Listen to this: triple the amount of fruits, double plus the amount of vegetables and legumes, double the amounts of nuts and seeds like avocados perhaps, and increase whole grains by 6 times: quinoa, wheat, barley. These are the kind of native foods, foods as they come in nature, foods as grown. They found in this study that if you eat more fruits, vegetables, legumes, and there's beans, and have some nuts, and particularly add more whole grains, not white flour, no, whole grains, you can really help yourself in delaying mortality. But they said you have to do something else. You have to cut out the meats as much as possible. They said you have to get the meat consumption down to 3 ounces a week. Now, 3 ounces, that's 14 grams a day. I mean, that's just, I mean, you might as well forget it. It's not worth the effort, is it? So you have to really, really cut back on meats. You also then want to really do something about processed meats. No processed meats, since they're related to carcinogenic aspects that we discussed, and also really cut out the sugary beverages, the empty calories, and cut your sodium, your salt intake in half. These simple dietary things, more fruits and vegetables and legumes, more nuts and whole grains in particular, and cutting back significantly on meats and eliminating processed meats and sugary beverages and cutting salt in half. I mean, look at this, an incredible health outcome. And I put it together into this eating continuum. If you are on the left-hand side, this is probably a typical American. This is probably a typical American who eats meats, dairy, eggs, processed foods, lots of sodium, alcohol, caffeine, and soda. This is a typical American diet. And if you could begin to cut back on these foods, reduce the frequency, the amount, and begin to eat more fruits and vegetables, more whole grains, lots of beans, some nuts and seeds, and lots of water to drink. You see, it makes a lot of difference. On the left-hand side on top, you see the word worst health outcomes. This is where the chronic diseases are. They reside on the left side. On the right-hand side on top, you see best health outcomes. This is where you see people that are 80, 90, 100, 105 years of age, and they're still swimming and doing their daily 10,000 steps. They're following a diet of fruits and vegetables, whole grains, legumes, some nuts and seeds, and lots of water to drink. And let me summarize. The experts have estimated that in the US, up to 80% of chronic disease and premature death could be prevented by making significant changes in diet and lifestyle. In addition, they found that we may also live 7 to 14 years longer by making these changes. So then here are some questions for you as we close. What would happen if we applied these preventive lifestyle-related strategies to existing chronic diseases? Sir, I already have heart disease. I already have diabetes. What am I supposed to do? Is it too late for me? No. Here's the next question. Could we influence these killer diseases? Yes. Could we arrest and disarm and perhaps even reverse these chronic killer diseases that are basically incurable in terms of medications and procedures? Could we make lifestyle changes and actually disarm these diseases? Come back, tune in on Monday night at 7 o'clock. I'll give you the solution.